Well, today the war against vegan activists has been won by the New South Wales government passing the Right to Farm bill through both houses, which will more than triple the maximum fines to $13,000 and up to 12 months jail for farm trespassers. The laws will also extend to sale yards, abattoirs and timber mills. Well, this is good news for the farmer and those that support agriculture, and we just had that economic discussion. That should be all of us that supports agriculture if you look at the terms of trade. The government, the New South Wales government, has come under pressure with the Public Service Association blaming the state government for what it said was the 35% cut to fire-trained positions in national parks. Now, how true are these allegations? Joining me now is the Deputy Premier and leader of the New South Wales National Party, John Barilaro. John, thanks so much for making the time. I know you've got a hectic schedule there in and around Parliament, but just take us through this legislation, this Right to Farm bill. It's now law, so it's an act. It's extraordinary, isn't it, in a country like Australia that you have to legislate for the right to farm. It should be part of our DNA.
Yeah, look, Peter, it's a historic day. We're the first jurisdiction to enshrine in law the protection for farmers to do what they do every day, and that is to feed this nation. Under this new law, this legislation, what we are saying, we are protecting farmers firstly from trespass, and we've seen that there was a rise of trespass earlier this year, a strategic approach by the Aussie farms guys who were trespassing on farms in the middle of the night, causing havoc and terrorising, I think, regional families, because their farm is their home. And imagine being confronted by a whole heap of vegan mung bean munchers in the middle of the night, trespassing because they want to somehow protect or advocate or protest in relation to animal cruelty or the way we treat animals. And what we've done today is protect those farmers from those trespass, one of the most significant fines in the country, significant penalties in dollar amounts, but also the possibility up to 3 years in jail. The second part is also what we call nuisance shield. You know, often we have farms that are on the outskirts of towns and villages, a little bit of urban encroachment and development, and before you know it, your neighbour is complaining about the smell or the noise of your farm, but yet they were the ones that came later, not you, yet they put you through a process where it can cost you lots of money to do what you've always done. So we today have protected the rights of farmers, but this is just the start. This particular legislation will also deal with future issues around encroachment, urban development, and of course protecting agricultural land.
Look, I have to say it's some pretty smart drafting by the Minister here and others who are involved in the legislation, because, as I said at the top of the show, it increases penalties to $13,000 for individual trespass, up from $5,500. That's no sizable increase, and a 12-month imprisonment term. Let's hope judges actually and magistrates pass on these sorts of penalties. But it creates a class of aggravated trespass, and this is the one I really want to concentrate on. The penalties will be increased if the person, the trespass, is accompanied by others, which is the pattern we see with these vegan activists. They hunt in a pack, they invade a farm in large numbers. Now, that takes it up to $22,000 per individual and 3 years imprisonment. You're not mucking around.
No, we're not. We're sending a clear message. You know, what we saw at the start of the year. This is an organised group that are trespassing, terrorising. I was criticised in budget estimates because I call these individuals that trespass domestic terrorists. But they do. They terrorise our families. Imagine living in an isolated property in rural or regional New South Wales. You know, you're miles away from your neighbour, but yet in the middle of the night, you're confronted by 10, 20, 30 trespass who believe they have the right to enter your private property for trespass, and it is organised. This isn't just a one-off, someone tying themselves to your front gate. This is organised, deliberate, to terrorise families in protest, and that's why today we're sending the clearest of all messages, and that is if you trespass in an organised way, those fines are significant, up to $22,500, and more importantly, up to 3 years jail. And we'll watch this space. We'll see how the courts react when we deal with this in the courts for those that trespass. And if this isn't enough to deter, and the courts are lenient, then we'll come back and touch this legislation up to make sure we send even stronger message.
I don't know if you caught my last segment. I had Adam Crichton on and Terry McCann. We were talking about some drought data and farming data that's come out in the last couple of days. But there was one statistic that really struck me that said the number of farms in Australia has halved since the mid-70s to now around 90,000. That's why this sort of legislation is important, is to keep people on the land, but also to encourage that next generation of farmer.
Oh, look, the thing that I'm fearful of at the end of this drought is that we're going to lose more farmers. You know, if you're a young person on the land and during one of the worst droughts in recorded history, you'd be questioning and asking why would you want to stay on the land. On top of that, you add these trespassers, people that intrude on your property, and you're probably going to give it away. So we want to make sure that we have an environment where farming and family farms are still part of the landscape. Look, we know that over time some of those family farms have been swallowed up by big corporates, but there's still a place in Australia for family farms, and we've got to make sure that we do everything to protect farms today and into the future, and that is from trespass, urban encroachment, and just the right to be able to do what you've always done, and that is to run a farm in a business-like, because there are great opportunities for us in New South Wales. The export market is significant. Our food and fibre is in high demand. We are the delicatessen for Asia, and people are prepared to pay the right price for our produce. So there is a future. We've just got to protect it, and that's what today we've put it enshrined in law.
I want to say too, and I know it's good luck and good management and good weather and the wind's not being as bad as we thought yesterday, but you know, a terrific achievement by firefighters right around the state of New South Wales to be, yes, we've lost homes, we've lost about 50 homes overnight, but not to see a loss of life in the last 24 hours with those catastrophic conditions yesterday is extraordinary. So all credit to you and ministers. I know people don't give politicians enough credit for these things. I know when the crises happen, I was there when the terror attacks happened. You know, it absolutely occupies the leadership team, so I suspect you've been busy. One of the things though, Deputy Premier, is having now had this debate, started off by the Greens trying to link the bushfires with climate change in an immediate sense, at least as a country we're starting to have a sensible discussion about what we can do to reduce the fuel load. Because I've talked about this issue for a number of years, but it's not something that anyone wants to get to, and now I think we're actually having that conversation. What are you going to do to make this a reality once we get through the worst of this fire season?
Yeah, look, the lessons from this fire over the weeks, months ahead, we're going to they will unfold. But there is no question that the fuel load on the forest floor, both in state forests and national parks, and predominantly national parks, is far too high. We have not cleared or backburned enough of that fuel load, and we know that. I think everybody lives in regional rural New South Wales. You know, often you'll hear farmers say that the national parks are their worst neighbour. They do very little in dealing with pest animals, and they do very little dealing with weeds, but they do very little in dealing with the amount of fuel that's on the forest floor, and that's going to be clear. You know, you don't have to spend months and months in a report trying to find that. We know that is an issue, and we've got to get on with it. The first people of this nation burnt the country to protect the country, and rather than creating national parks and then locking them up, we've got to have a more managed approach. So, you know, my goal here is that we get through this season, because it is going to be tough. We've still got fires ahead of us. We support the crews on the ground. We deal with what's in front of us. But we have to come out the other end and have another look at how we manage the fuel loads. Maybe no longer should national parks or state forests actually do the burning. Maybe it's time for the RFS to take control across all lands. We should learn from the first people, use new technology. And I know the CSIRO are doing some great work. I had a chat with Warren Mundine. He also has talked about some programs, and I think we've got to come together as a community, and as you rightly touched on, I think people are prepared to have the conversation. Let's talk about this in a reasonable way. The conversation has started, but I'm focused on now making sure we get through the rest of the fires this summer. But there is no doubt we've got to do more when it comes to burning the fuel load and removing the fuel load on our forest floor.
Yeah, just on that point, the Public Service Association have criticised the government, your government, saying that you know, they haven't done enough in reducing the fuel load because of budget cuts, because of personnel cuts. I don't think many people understand that it's the rangers at the moment monitor these parks, not the RFS. I know my former boss, Tony Abbott, who's now proudly a deputy captain of his brigade, always argued that it should be the RFS doing more of this stuff. And last night, the Volunteer Firefighters Association chief, Mick Halton, was on with Alan Jones and I, and he says, you know, this is a case of green mania, green religion and locking up forests. I think he backs you in. But what would you say to the PSA?
It's simple, you know, they shouldn't be fibbing. I mean, the reality is we've seen more firefighting personnel in their ranks, and the Premier made that clear today in question time. She clearly articulated the increase in personnel budget, and again, it's the PSA, typical of a union, using something like this as a disaster in relation to their claim.